I will start now pass over to our second speaker. Joins us from across the pond, Ken Richman. So Ken is from the Massachusetts College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences in the States, and the work he will be presenting, which was done together with Jay Anderson from Utrecht University, focuses on one very important thing. We spoke about ambassadorship, how to be an ambassador, how to be ourselves, but on the other hand, the elephant in the room maybe, masking. How does it impact us, but also how can masking get to the point of being a social injustice, and how will it impact us in this journey of advocacy? So to discuss that more with us, the floor, I will pass over the floor to Ken Richman. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So good, thank you very much. I'm so grateful to be able to present this to you today. And as our chair mentioned, this is a project between myself, jointly with Joel Anderson from the University of Utrecht, and we're philosophers. And so we're not working with data necessarily, although we want to be grounded in real world experience and knowledge, which is one reason that I come to conferences like this. And so I'm going to give a philosophical talk about masking and ethics, and I don't need to explain what masking is to you all. And you're here because you're interested in autism, and so you're going to know a lot about that. But I want to talk about the unique moral, ethical aspect of the burden of masking on autistic people. Talk about how that relates to some philosophical concepts involving recognition and autonomy, and think about the moral responsibilities of others. You know that autistic masking can be harmful. It creates a burden. It takes cognitive resources from other things that are important in autistic lives and everyone's lives, and of course can lead to burnout. And we know why it happens. That is, it's about, in part, managing social expectations, family expectations, workplace expectations. It can also be about responding to clinical passing demands. That is, behavioral therapists insisting that autistic children and sometimes autistic adults insisting that they mask in order to move on to the next task or please their parents or please the authority figures. And the puzzle that came to me in talking with my co-author, Joel Anderson, was, well, when we think about life, everyone has all kinds of ways to deal with social expectations. But there's something pretty special about autistic masking. And so you see, even Billy Joel masks. But what is it about autistic masking that feels different, that is different, there's a different kind of burden than the social expectations burden that everyone takes on? And so we began talking about how to characterize the specific moral aspect of autistic masking. And that's what this talk is about. So we began to recognize that masking is obviously social. It's not something that you do by yourself. We do this in social contacts with one another, at the workplace, at home, in our friendships, etc. And so generally speaking, it's not always the case, but generally speaking, the social moral things are about justice, right? They're about what's fair and unfair. So we began to look at this under a concept of justice. Now, not all inequalities or burdens are unjust, right? So one thing about autistic masking is that it's a burden, right? It's hard. Another is that it's kind of unequal, right? It seems that neurotypical people who aren't autistic or who don't have to mask in the same way, it's just not as hard for them. And that's one of the things that bothers us, is that inequality. But not all harms or inequalities are unjust. If my house gets hit by a meteorite and gets destroyed, but my neighbor's doesn't, then it's sort of random, right? That's an inequality and it's harm, but it doesn't seem to be unjust. It's not a social thing. Other differences, say even in opportunity, are also, they're differences, and we may be annoyed by them, but they don't seem to be unjust, right? So Messi gets to play lots of football matches and I don't. Well, there's a reason for that, right? I don't find that to be an inequality that bothers me in any way, even though I might be, prefer to be better at sports. And My friend Jane, she gets to walk downstairs with her coffee and go to work, whereas I have to either have to or get to take this purple train, depending on how you feel about trains, and it costs money and it takes time, but that's, in this case, is a result of our workplace and job choices, and so I don't think that that's unfair or unjust either. So we're working this concept out. We're thinking about what is it about autistic masking that is morally problematic? It's a burden, it is unequal, what is it? And so we began to think about it this way. Insofar as the burden of masking arises from reasonably avoidable social expectations, it's not just a harmful burden, but it's unjust. And this is drawn, some of you may kind of recognize this as being drawn from David Marmot's conception of health inequities, where he says, when you've got systematic differences in health that are the result of reasonably avoidable differences, right? Reasonably avoidable inequalities. Some things you can't avoid, but if you could have avoided it and you didn't, that's not good, right? Then that's unfair. And so we're thinking about what are the reasonable social expectations that we can have and what are unreasonable ones? And so we came up with a couple of ways of thinking about this. Here's the first one. We call it attributional injustice. Attributional injustice is an unreasonable or false assessment of whether a person or a group has what is required to fill a social role. Attributional injustice. And here's an example, right? So two people in a cafeteria, so maybe they work together or they go to school together, and one says, I could never be friends with an autistic person because autistic people can't care about others, right? So that's clearly false, but setting this idea, well, friends have to care about one another, and autistic people can't do that. And so I'm thinking about that as Sally, and her colleague here is Anne, for obvious reasons. I want to be friends with Sally, says Anne, or thinks Anne, right? Because she doesn't want Sally to hear this. Therefore, I will hide the fact that I'm autistic. So in this attributional injustice category, Sally falsely believes that autistic people can't be friends because it can only care about themselves, and Anne adapts. And what we want to say is that this burden on Anne that she takes on to adapt is unjust, right? And that's different from the just kind of normal social conformity that most people, right, have to do and learn to do. This is unjust because it's based on Sally's unreasonable attribution or withholding the attribution of being able to care about others. So that's the first way that we think that masking, the burden of masking on autistic people can be unfair, unjust. I have another idea, and this is, philosophers, we put it out to find out when we're wrong, and we're usually wrong, and so I hope that you'll share in what ways we're wrong when you have an opportunity. The other category is criterion injustice, which we identify as an unreasonable or false assessment of what is required. So the attributional injustice is, you may have fair requirements. Yeah, to be a friend, you have to care about other people. For criterion injustice, it's an unfair criterion, right? So with attribution, yeah, and can't meet these reasonable requirements, but here the requirements themselves are unreasonable and therefore avoidable and false. So let's think about how this looks. Same graphic with different text, where Sally is saying out loud, people can't listen unless they maintain typical eye contact. That's why I can't be friends with autistic people. And now Anne is thinking, I need to work hard to maintain typical eye contact so that I can be friends. Takes on that burden of masking. Now, here we see, right, Sally again has a false belief, which is unfair, and it's a false belief about what's required in order to be a friend, in order to care about other people, and so Anne takes on that burden, and we want to say that this is another instance of injustice. One important aspect of this is that, as we've seen in these examples, they involve false beliefs. And we all have false beliefs, right? For instance, I believe that I'm good looking, right? We all have false beliefs about all kinds of things, right? And some of them are adaptive and some of them are not. So here are two people. One of them thinks that they're looking at a banana and the other one thinks correctly that it's not a banana, right? So, we all have false beliefs about various things. But there are things that we can reasonably expect people to know, right? Like that it's a bad idea to drive the wrong way on the street. And that's a reasonable thing to expect people to know. And then we have this question, what is it reasonable to expect people to know about autism? And we want to say that this is changing, right? And it's changing pretty fast. I know in the United States, it's changing quite fast. Well, we've got, actually, it's getting very messy quite fast. But for a while, it was getting quite reasonable. That people were learning more, adapting more, having more realistic and reasonable expectations and knowledge so that we could rely on people and we could more to have true beliefs and expect them to have true beliefs. So that's why we say, are we there yet? Kids in the back of the car, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Asking their parents. When I first put these together, we weren't in quite such a mess in the US about what people knew and believed about autism. But I want to say that there are a lot of different members of our community who have a responsibility to make sure that we have true beliefs and that the public is well informed so that we can increase our expectations of what people can reasonably be expected to know. And sometimes it's appropriate to blame people. This is a sort of really bad blame is bad, but sometimes it's actually appropriate to blame people for having false beliefs and say, no, that is unjust. We know about injustices, and sometimes there can be injustices that are systematic or individual for which somebody may not realize that they're doing it, and sometimes we don't blame them, but there are reasonable expectations that we can hold people to. And I want to use my remaining seconds to say that all of this, we can put all of this into a framework of recognition where we have a duty to recognize other people as who they are and what they can do, and that our failure to do that is a failure of respect, sometimes a failure of justice when it's in a certain context, and that we have a duty to take reasonable steps to recognize other people as the competent and in their richness and in the abilities that they actually have. So obviously I'll start there because I'm at 0. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ken. That was really an interesting and unique take on this topic. So we have time for one question, like for Ken. Who would like to ask a question?
It's a very different type of topic, but I'd be very happy to speak with anyone after.
Okay, yes, we do have one question. So the person like in the shirt here, so if we could actually have the green shirt, yes, I mean, those are policemen shirts.
Thank you for your presentation. So I'm a PhD candidate, but I come from China. Actually, my topic is very close to your presentation. So I do have one question. You just said we have a duty to take responsibility to accept others, but Chinese. Actually, my major my project is about the quality of life for school-aged autistic children in China. But I'm thinking about lots of the culture background. Chinese, I think in China, school-aged autistic children, they really care about the stigma. This is a cultural background. So if we can accept who we are, so what do you think about how deal with the cultural background in China?
Good. I don't know a lot about the cultural background in China specifically. However, what I want to say is that I think that this this stigma is one category that, or concept that we can use to understand masking and what causes masking and what's bad about masking. We're offering this as another framework and a different vocabulary to use it, which is maybe additional to stigma. And I think that my view is that cultures, the leaders of cultures have a moral responsibility to change, right, and to make change. They often miss that opportunity and they don't do it, and then we say that's bad. It was their responsibility, and when we don't do what we're responsible to do, then that's impermissible. It's bad. So we're focusing on this moral rather than explaining why something happens, right? Talking about what our duties are, in terms of ethics. And I would love to hear more about what you're working on, maybe right after. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ken. Again, we remind you, do use the app, use this networking opportunity, like a lot to chew on there.